Evening all. Stephen here once again. Happy Friday evening. Smoking once again my Mr. Brog Indigo horn shape. And in it some Germain's Rich Dark Flake, which I'm going to have the customary struggle to keep alight. I think that's got it. Cheers. Happy Friday. Now, hope you've all had a good week. I was going to do sort of a VR of sorts to Mark, aka HoosierPiper. He wasn't asking for VRs, but he did a very interesting video earlier this week. Because Mark and his wife went out and did some fantastic work out in Cambodia. Those of you that have watched his videos will have known that. Some very, very worthwhile stuff that they gave up their lives in the States and moved right way around the world to do. And fantastic. Commend him for it. And his wife, of course. But he was recounting the other day a tale of when they were burgled in Cambodia. And it set me thinking about an experience of my own. I'm going to have another go. I've only ever been burgled once in my life, which living in London is quite extraordinary because we have a pretty high crime rate and a pretty high burglary rate. But I've only been burgled once, and that was 22 years ago, April 1995. And I'm able to say that with absolute certainty because of the circumstances. My wife at the time, my ex-wife now, and I were living just one street over from where I am now. We had a little two-bedroom Victorian mid-terrace house. And at the time of the burglary, well, my wife was pregnant with our first child. And she was 2 weeks overdue, 2 weeks past her expected date of confinement. And the policy around here is once you get to 2 weeks, then you're taken into the local hospital, which in our case was down in Greenwich, about 6 miles away. And they start the induction process, start inducing. So that's what we did. And obviously I went in there because I had every intention of being there throughout the whole process and being there for the birth. And they started it on the Tuesday afternoon, the inducing. And I sat there and waited, and of course there's no way of telling how long the process is going to take. And it got to sort of fairly late in the evening, and the doctor said, look, nothing's going to happen tonight, you might as well go home and get some sleep. Obviously if anything should occur in the middle of the night, we'll call you and you can come back in. So off I went, got in the car and went back home. Now you know what it's like when you go into a familiar situation, something that you've been into so many times before, familiar set of circumstances. But you know immediately, without knowing what it is that's wrong, you know something is wrong. There's something's triggered it, and you know something's wrong, but before you've even identified what it is. And I had that sensation. I drove back home, drove into our road, pulled down to the outside our house, going to park. And these were very small houses. There was only a very tiny front yard, a couple of feet deep, so they were almost on the pavement. And I thought, something's not right. And then I looked over and I realised, of course, what it was, even though I'd spotted it from the corner of my eye as soon as I came round, that the lights were all on in the house. This being April, it was quite dark, it was late evening. And not only were the lights on in the house, the blinds were all up, and there were people walking around carrying my stuff. It was a bit of a shock. Excuse me a second, I'll have another go. I'll keep looking at the camera because I can't see what I'm doing. And my immediate reaction, of course, is one of anger. I mean, immediately your adrenaline starts pumping. You protect your property, whatever. I mean, you don't even stop to think about it. So I just left the car in the middle of the road, jumped out and ran to the front door, wanting to go in and lay hands on them. But of course, they hadn't gone in through the front door, they'd come in through the back door. They'd actually kicked the back door in. Nobody had paid, we're terraced house, neighbours on either side. They'd stood there and kicked the back door in, which must have made quite a racket. Nobody did anything. That's London for you. So I couldn't get through the front door because the key to the front door was on the same keychain as the ignition key for the car, which was still in the ignition of the car that I just jumped out of. So in my anger, I banged on the door and said, "I'll kill you, you bastard," and went back to get the key. Now, in the meantime, of course, me banging on the door and shouting had panicked them, and they legged it. By the time I got back with the key, opened the front door and went through, I could just see them running out the back door. There was a minimum of 3 of them, maybe even 4. And they dropped just about everything that they'd actually picked up. Dropped and broke a fair few things as well. And actually, as it turns out, I mean, I chased them, but you'd have to understand the situation of our house, which was out of my back door, was then along a balcony, down a staircase, down the garden, and they were gone. You know, there was no chance of me catching them. As I say, they dropped most of what they'd taken, and I just had to watch them go. And it's incredible, unless you've actually been burgled. It's a difficult thing to describe, but it's the sense of violation. I mean, it's only property, I know. It's not as though anybody had been touched or injured. But it's the sense of violation that these people just thought they could walk up and kick my back door in and just stroll around inside the house and help themselves to whatever they wanted of my stuff. And it just made me so angry. I was so burning with anger. Of course, with calm and sober reflection, and I haven't mentioned the sober word, I'll have a drink. It was just as well that I cocked up with the keys and couldn't get through the front door. Because this was a small house. There were at least 2 of them in the room immediately to the left of the front door, and if I had actually had the keys to begin with and gone straight in, their only way out would have been through me, and there was at least one of them, they had another one of them in the kitchen down below. And let's face it, I mean, I wanted to get hold of them. What are you doing? You know, I wanted to, but it's probably just as well I didn't. Because real life isn't like the movies, is it? And I'm no superhero where you go in and you lay waste to all the bad guys with some sort of well-aimed punches and kicks. There was more of them than me, and I don't think I would have come off that best out of it. And as I panicked them as well, and to the extent that they dropped what they were carrying, but I found out afterwards that one of the things that one of the guys in the room to my left was carrying was up in my bedroom. He'd found an old air pistol of mine, a 1960s vintage Webley Premier. And this is a solid chunk of metal. It's heavy. I've never handled a real handgun, but I should imagine the weight isn't that far off. So if I'd gone bursting through the front door and panicked them, and he'd brought that down on the top of my head, it wouldn't have been a good result. So, on reflection, it's just as well that I didn't actually come face to face. We like to think we could handle it, but, you know, who knows what would have happened. So they got away. I called the police, then I had to get an emergency locksmith out, because of course I was going to have to go back to the hospital the next day and stay there for many, many more hours, which was quite worrying, but burglars generally aren't that stupid. They're not going to go back. When they've been caught in the act one night, they're not going to go back the next night. And I'd had locks done, and of course I left lights on and blinds down, so they would have had no way of knowing if anyone was in there. But, yeah, that was my burglary attempt. They dropped most of what they were carrying. They got away with a leather jacket of mine, a laptop, and worst of all was a very good friend of ours had loaned us his video camera. I mean, this was the mid-90s, so these were big things, with a videotape in. And he'd loaned it to us so that we could record, you know, take film throughout my wife's pregnancy. And they took that, and of course the film was in it, and they got away with it. So we lost all of that. There was other things that fortunately they missed, like stuff that my wife had inherited from her grandparents, and there was even an envelope with some cash in it. But it's not so much the losing the property, it's the violation. It's this sense that people have been in your bedroom, your living room, your kitchen, just looking around and taking whatever they wanted. Oh dear. As I say, the police came round, and once again, you know, if it's the movies or a TV series, they're taking statements and fingerprints, one thing and another, and they're on the trail of the bad guys. Burglaries in London are 10 a penny, especially in the area I live in. They knew they were gone and they were never going to catch them, so they sort of came round, took the details, and then went. They weren't interested. So I just had to put it behind me. Of course, I didn't tell my wife while she was in hospital expecting it. She didn't find out until afterwards. But it added a lot of stress to an already stressful situation. And as it turned out, you didn't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out why they'd actually selected our house on that particular night. Because my wife was on a maternity ward with about 6 or 8 beds on it. And someone had come in on that day, and she was only there for one day, some kind of strange admittance. And she struck up a friendship with my wife and was talking to her and asking her lots of questions and being really chatty and chummy. You know, you'd expect on a maternity ward, all women in it together, everything would be fine. And so she was asking about the kind of situation where we lived and, you know, whether we had any other kids and is your husband going to be here? And to make it even simpler for them, the hospital practice then, I don't know if it still is now, this was 22 years ago, was they'd hang the notes, of course, on the end of the bed for doctors and nurses to look at and update. Full home address on it. So all this woman had to do was pump my wife for information, then, you know, perhaps when she popped out to the toilet, take a note of the address, pass it on to her accomplices, and hey presto, the night that I was meant to be in hospital with my wife giving birth, they happened to turn up at our house and kick the back door in. Told the police, they weren't interested. Once again, if it had been on the TV, they'd have been up the hospital, they'd have sent someone up the hospital and said, you need to do this. No. So that was it, that was my burglary experience. And once I calmed down, you know, I was glad they hadn't got away with more than they did. And once the sense of violation was over, it wasn't so bad. But what I wasn't to know, because I'd never been through it before, is, you know, I thought, well, you know, you pay all this money in premiums to insurance companies to insure your house contents. And now you've got to make a claim. Fine, you make a claim and you get your money back. I'm wrangled for months with these people. You know, they take your money every year. And I was shocked at the extent to which they will go to try and avoid paying you anything. It really was an eye-opener for me. You know, to the extent that they almost made me feel like a criminal by suggesting that what I was claiming for hadn't actually been taken. Even with my jacket, I had to go back through loads and loads of photographs to find a picture of myself wearing it. That was a real eye-opener. I've got a very jaded view of insurance companies these days. And I also, one thing I learned from it, which I've done ever since, keep a receipt for absolutely everything you buy. Get a box, get a file, whatever. Get a receipt for everything you buy and keep it for years. Because you never know, if you ever get burgled and there's something stolen, and the insurance company are going to try and make you prove that you actually owned what you say was taken. So that's what I do. So I've got boxes of receipts. Never been burgled since. But I mustn't speak too soon. So that's my burglary story, Mark, and everyone else that's watched. As I said before, I hope you've all had a great week. As you can see, I think I mentioned it, I found a better way to hold this. It's got quite thick walls, so it doesn't get hot. And that's the best way to hold it. 17 minutes, I'm checking out. Bye-bye all. Hope to speak to you again tomorrow or Sunday, over the weekend, whatever. And in the meantime, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you're safe, content, well and warm, you and your loved ones, and you have a great weekend. Bye-bye.